Welcome to the world of Dreamside Traveler. Here, beneath the soothing sound of gentle rain, we journey through time and space, uncovering the mysteries of the past and diving into the most captivating pages of human history. This place is created for those who love exploring the world in the quiet of evening, for those who value peace while yearning to discover something new before sleep. If you enjoy what you're hearing, please give this video a like. It helps other people find our stories. Help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers in our club of nighttime history lovers. And the Dreamside Traveler channel will become your faithful guide to sleep. We're constantly adding new stories for your peaceful evenings. And if you have ideas about which historical topics interest you, or simply want to share your thoughts, leave comments below the video. I'm genuinely curious to know what inspires you. Now close your eyes. Feel this gentle rain outside your window. Allow yourself to relax. Our journey begins right now. Once upon a time, in an America slowly waking up from its wartime slumber, somewhere between the smell of morning coffee and the crackle of newspapers, a little girl named Norma Jean Mortensen was born. She did not arrive in the world beneath camera flashes or the embrace of privilege. Instead, she entered a small Lowe's Angels Hospital at the very beginning of summer in the year 1926. Her mother, Gladys, carried a history weighted by worries and the unknown. Her father would always be an empty page in the family story. From her earliest days, Norma Jean grew up among shadows and shifting lights. These were years when America did not yet believe in its own fairy tale. Dreams were sold at discount, and childish laughter faded away in the corridors of foster homes and orphanages. Norma Jean learned quickly that life offered no guarantees, and sometimes the only way to survive was to close your eyes and imagine yourself as someone else, even for a moment. Yet, somewhere deep inside, through all the blurry memories of restless nights, a tiny flame was smoldering. That very spark would one day light up an entire screen. It could have easily flickered out at the slightest wind of disappointment. But instead, it flared and drew her to the doors of Hollywood. Marilyn Monroe did not exist yet. There was only a girl with golden curls and a smile that promised sunshine even on a cloudy morning. In the year 1946, when Norma Jean signed her first contract with a major studio, she was asked to change almost everything. Her name, her hair color, even her laughter. They offered her the name Marilyn after a famous Broadway actress, and Monroe borrowed from her mother's maiden name. That is how not just a star, but a legend was born pieced together from fragments of longing and hope. Her early roles were so brief you could blink and miss them. She played secretaries, lovers, and women in the shadows. Still, there was something in her look that made audiences hold their breath. She seemed to whisper through the screen, "I know who you think I am. And maybe I am playing by your rules, or maybe I am tricking you all." Her real breakthrough came in the year 1950, when Marilyn landed parts in films like The Asphalt Jungle and All About Eve. Directors were the first to notice, but soon the whole of America followed. Within a few years, her name became a brand. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, How to Marry a Millionaire, The 7-Year Itch. Every film, every scene slowly melted into a part of collective memory. Even when she stood on stage in a pink dress studded with jewels, singing about diamonds being a girl's best friend, there was always something real and vulnerable at the bottom of her eyes. Marilyn knew she was treated like a joke, a symbol, a naive blonde, and she decided to fight those labels. In 1955, she started her own production company, a bold move for any woman of that era. She left for New York to study real acting with Lee Strasberg and returned with critical acclaim for her role in Bus Stop. Then came Some Like It Hot, her most dazzling explosion on screen, which earned her the highest acting honors. But every legend has another side, raw, painfully human. Her life off-screen was often tabloid material. Scandals, divorces, secrets, and heartbreaking losses. Her first marriage to Jim Doherty was a way to avoid returning to the orphanage when she was just a teenager. He joined the Navy, and Norma Jean began her transformation into Marilyn. Their marriage collapsed just as her photos started appearing in magazines. The next chapter is her story with Joe DiMaggio, a baseball legend and true national hero. They were called America's golden couple. But away from the cameras, the real drama unfolded. Joe could not bear the image of Marilyn on screen, his jealousy sometimes turning into anger. 9 months after the wedding, another divorce. Yet Joe, despite everything, stayed close even after they were officially separated. He sent flowers to her grave for years, a silent proof of love. Her third husband, playwright Arthur Miller, seemed to bring a different kind of partnership. She converted to his faith. He called her his muse. But his world was full of books and cold irony, and she was often left feeling alone within it. They lost each other with every new tragedy, every failed attempt to become parents. These heartbreaks tore at her spirit, and the press did not miss a single detail. Everything became public property. Let me ask you this. How would you feel if every pain, every mistake you made became a spectacle for millions? If all you wanted was peace and quiet, but the world demanded more, always more. Marilyn spent her whole life searching for something real, love, acceptance, sincerity, and so rarely found it. She kept going somehow through scandals and breakdowns, through illnesses and addictions, through loneliness and fear. In 1961, she was even committed to a psychiatric hospital against her will, an experience that left a deep scar on her soul. But she kept walking forward, surviving storms that would have broken anyone else. The last act of her movie life was The Misfits, a film written for her by Arthur Miller. In this movie, Marilyn did not just play a role, she lived, she suffered, she glowed, showing the real woman hidden behind all the Hollywood glitter. But on the night of August 5th, 1962, everything came to an end. Marilyn was found dead in her Los Angeles home. She was only 36. The official version was suicide, but rumors, conspiracies, and suspicion quickly wrapped her passing in myth. People spoke of politicians, the mafia, betrayal, and injustice. But one thing remains certain. The world lost more than a movie star that night. It lost a dream, a symbol, a living contradiction of light and darkness. Her presence is still everywhere, in fashion, in movies, in music, in every vintage magazine cover. Her image has been reimagined by Madonna, Lady Gaga, Nicki Minaj, Gwen Stefani, all of them, at some point, put on her mask. Andy Warhol made her face into a work of art. Elton John wrote her a ballad that later became an anthem for Princess Diana. Marilyn did not just set a new standard for beauty. She redefined what it meant to be a celebrity. Vulnerability became part of her strength, and that changed the world. Few people knew her true intellect. Her IQ was remarkably high, and she had a huge library. She loved reading James Joyce's Ulysses. She devoured Dostoevsky and Walt Whitman. She was also a pioneer in conversations about mental health, not always by choice, but because her crises were so public, the world was forced to discuss them openly. Her pain, her searching, her endless attempts to keep her inner flame alive in the artificial world of Hollywood, all of this made her unforgettable. Her last legendary moment was the nearly transparent dress she wore to sing Happy Birthday to President Kennedy. That dress was sold at auction decades later for a record sum, but that's not what matters. What matters is that with a single whisper, a single hint of a smile, she became a story. Why was Marilyn Monroe special? Because she was a living contradiction. Dazzling yet uncertain, desperate yet gentle, manufactured by Hollywood but truly authentic inside. She was not just an actress, she was an idea. A presence that haunts and inspires long after her time. Marilyn once said that she did not mind living in a man's world if she could remain a woman in it. In that one line, there is both surrender and rebellion, and a little sadness. She did not break the old mold. She melted it down and built something new out of glitter and tears. For many decades now, the world cannot look away from her ghost. The cameras have long been switched off, but her light never goes out. In every shade of red lipstick, in every breath of silk, in every faded photograph, she is not just a star, she is a living myth. Now I want to ask you, do you believe that true fame brings people happiness? Or does it take more than it gives? Share your thoughts in the comments and help keep this conversation alive. Imagine a night heavy with southern heat, the kind that sticks to your skin and hangs in the air even after the sun disappears. On one such night, in a tiny two-room house in Tupelo, Mississippi, a cry pierced the darkness and changed the course of music history. That was the night when Elvis Presley arrived in this world, not alone, but with a silent companion, a twin brother, Jesse Garon, who did not survive his first breath. That absence followed Elvis for all his days, a shadow that whispered, "You are living for two." He was the only surviving child of Vernon and Gladys Presley, two people who loved their boy with a kind of desperate tenderness, trying to shield him from the rawness of poverty and the storms of life. They did not have much. The walls of their house were thin, the floorboards cold, but the air was thick with gospel hymns, the stories of the Bible, and the hope that tomorrow might be kinder. In those early years, the world felt small. Just a boy, his mother, and a father who drifted between odd jobs, always chasing work, always coming home tired. There was never enough money, but there was always music. Sometimes it was the sweet sadness of a blues guitar floating through the open window from a neighbor's radio. Other times it was Gladys humming softly as she worked, her voice rising up like a prayer. By the time Elvis turned 13, the Presleys packed up their hopes and belongings and moved to Memphis, Tennessee. That city buzzed and breathed music. It seeped through every crack and puddle, echoing in the juke joints and tumbling out of church doors on Sunday mornings. Elvis soaked it all in, the stomp and shout of black gospel, the moaning guitars of the Delta blues, the urgent twang of country songs that rolled out from every front porch. His hair grew long, his eyes watched and listened, and somewhere deep inside, a rhythm began to burn. He was a shy kid, polite, with a southern drawl, and eyes that always looked just a little bit lost. But there was something in him that refused to settle. He knew he did not look or sound like anyone else at Hum's High School. He felt it in the way people stared, in the way they laughed at his thrift shop clothes. But he also felt it in the electricity that sparked in his chest every time he heard a song on the radio. At 18, he saved up a few precious dollars and walked into Sun Records to make a recording for his mother's birthday. Nobody in that room could have known what was about to happen. The studio was nothing special, just dusty floors and yellowing sheet music piled on every flat surface. The owner, Sam Phillips, was busy, distracted, and not particularly impressed at first. But one night, Elvis started playing around with a blues number called That's All Right. His voice rose, a little wild, a little raw, and something in the room shifted. The music was not quite country, not quite blues, and not exactly gospel. It was something new, something dangerous and alive. That recording spun across Memphis like a spark in dry grass. Teenagers listened, and the world exploded. The sound was unfiltered, urgent, all hips and heartbreak and hope. Radio DJs did not know what to do with him. Was he black or white? Was this rockabilly or rhythm and blues or something nobody had ever heard before? It did not matter. What mattered was how it felt. For young people, it was like the world had been black and white, and suddenly Elvis lit it up in color. Adults heard him and panicked, clutching their pearls and shaking their heads, but the kids heard freedom. Television came next. The Ed Sullivan Show, the Milton Berle Show, and that infamous moment when he danced on national TV and sent a whole generation into chaos. They called him Elvis the Pelvis, and people wrote letters begging the networks to film him only from the waist up. But you cannot unsee a revolution. Those swiveling hips were more than a dance move. They were rebellion in motion, a living dare to anyone who still thought music should sit quietly in the corner. By the close of the 1950s, Elvis Presley was not just a singer. He was the king. Songs like Heartbreak Hotel, Hound Dog, Jailhouse Rock, and Don't Be Cruel rattled every radio speaker from coast to coast. His hair was slicked back into a pompadour, sideburns sharp, his sneer both challenge and invitation. Girls screamed, boys tried to imitate him, and somewhere in all the noise you could feel the shape of America shifting. But just as the world seemed ready to give him anything, it called him away. In the late 1950s, the United States Army drafted Elvis. For 2 years, he wore a uniform in Germany, trading his guitar for discipline, the stage for the barracks. The screaming stopped. His mother passed away while he was gone, and something inside him cracked, quietly but deeply. When he came home, the edges had softened. He was more polished, more careful, and the wild rebel that first set fire to rock and roll now walked a little heavier. Hollywood wanted Elvis, and for much of the 1960s, he gave it what it wanted. Glossy musicals, handsome love stories, sun-drenched beaches, and girls in bright swimsuits. Blue Hawaii, Viva Las Vegas, GI Blues, movies that filled theaters, lined pockets, and packaged the king into something safe and profitable. The films were fun, sometimes even magical, but slowly that original danger faded. The boy who rattled the world was now a brand. Critics sneered. Some fans drifted away. But for millions, the love never died. Then came a night that changed everything. A television special in 1968. There he was, dressed in black leather, sweat shining on his forehead, sitting on a small stage with nothing but a guitar and the sound of his own heartbeat in his ears. The music was raw, stripped bare, alive with hunger and pride. Elvis looked straight into the camera, straight through the years, and reminded everyone that fire does not forget how to burn. That moment reignited his career and introduced him to a new generation. Even now, if you close your eyes, you can almost feel the heat coming off the screen. He conquered Las Vegas next. Starting in 1969, he took over the International Hotel, transforming every show into a carnival of lights, sound, and swagger. The jumpsuits grew more extravagant, the crowds bigger, the energy wilder. He sang with an orchestra, a gospel choir, a wall of horns. On stage, he was a gladiator in rhinestones, sweat-soaked, commanding, the center of a universe that swayed to his every word. But fame, like gravity, always pulls. The 1970s became a slow and painful unraveling. The lights grew brighter, but the man behind them began to flicker. Health problems multiplied, prescription pills piled up. He became more isolated, Graceland turning from a home into a fortress, surrounded by an entourage that always said yes, but never really listened. The king, once so alive, grew heavier, more haunted, his joy slipping quietly out of reach. He still sang with a voice that could rattle windows and raise goosebumps. But underneath it all, the boy from Tupelo was losing his way. On a hot August day in 1977, Elvis Presley died in his beloved Memphis. He was just 42. The official cause was cardiac arrest, but everyone knew the real cause was something bigger, a life lived too brightly, a soul squeezed by fame, loneliness, and addiction. The world mourned in a way it never had before. Radio stations played nothing but Elvis. People stood outside Graceland in tears. Even those who never liked rock and roll had to admit something immense, something irreplaceable, had gone away. But if you listen closely, you know the story did not really end. Elvis did not leave the building. His image is everywhere, in glittering jumpsuits, in the curled lips of imitators, in velvet paintings, in the silly sandwiches stuffed with peanut butter and banana. he remains one of the best-selling solo artists in history, with more than 1 billion records spun, sung, and danced to. His influence stretches from the Beatles to the Rolling Stones, from Eminem to Bruno Mars. He did not invent rock and roll, but he was the first to turn it into a worldwide phenomenon. And yet, his story is not simple. He bridged black and white music at a time when America still clung to segregation. Some say he borrowed too much, and there is truth in that, but Elvis always spoke openly about the black artists he admired. He was not trying to steal. He wanted to share what moved his heart. His legacy is a puzzle, a revolutionary who shattered expectations, but who also let himself be trapped by the very image he created. He broke rules, but in the end, he let the machine package him neatly. Still, nobody can deny the earthquake he started. Before Elvis, there were singers. After Elvis, there were rock stars. Did you know he was a black belt in karate? That he gave away Cadillacs as if they were candies? That he never performed outside North America, not because he did not want to, but because his manager could not legally travel? That he had a pet chimpanzee called Scatter, recorded more than 700 songs, but never wrote a single one himself? His greatest love was gospel music, and the only Grammys he ever won were for singing about faith. When Elvis sang How Great Thou Art, even the skeptics listened. So what made him special? Maybe it was the way he stepped onto a stage and made it feel like the very center of the universe. Maybe it was the way he made teenagers scream and grandmothers sway. Maybe it was because he did not just sing. He radiated, took the music of America, blasted it through a microphone, and sent it out into the night with a sneer, a smile, and a wild, beautiful swagger. Let me ask you, have you ever wondered what it would feel like for your passion to become your burden? What price would you pay for a taste of everlasting fame? Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, maybe you will hear the gentle echo of Can't Help Falling in Love swirling through your dreams. Somewhere, out there, the king is still singing. And every time you hear a guitar riff, every time someone puts on a sequined suit or curls a lip in defiance, remember, Elvis lives. Absolutely. Here comes the detailed, expanded, and emotionally rich retelling of Audrey Hepburn's story. Crafted Delia Zaakal Peliveo Cyrillic letter 457, Aude Cyrillic letter 456, Ozeveu Cheki, Zaakat Sayente Omna Tem Osf Yeru. Deyeta El Cyrillic letter 456, Teaka Eraka Teyer. Beyezep Cyrillic letter 456. Dezageo Eloveka Cyrillic letter 456. Vecheyero Zede Cyrillic letter 456. Eloveka El Cyrillic letter 456. N Cyrillic letter 456 Ikratkoi. Ves Cyrillic letter 456. Chesla. Uvege El Yade Cyrillic letter 456. Shao El Yege Kao Chete Ayute Yeri Esya Vege OLOS. Pes Cyrillic letter 456. SL Yazeaka Cyrillic letter 456. En Cheye en Enya Peo Deam Kao Ero Teke Yakratkoi. Opei Esukea Era Cyrillic letter 457. NS Yeri Kao U. Let's begin. In the long gallery of 20th century legends, where the faces of Monroe and Presley and Brando gleam in the flickering lights of memory, There is one light that never burns out. It's softer, not blinding. It doesn't demand attention. It invites you to lean closer, to listen, to notice the way grace and kindness can move through a world obsessed with spectacle. That is the place Audrey Hepburn quietly holds, untouchable, serene, never overshadowed by scandal or noise. Audrey's journey didn't start on a velvet stage beneath the spotlights of Hollywood. She was born Audrey Kathleen Rustin on a spring day in early May, in a quiet apartment in Brussels, Belgium. She arrived just before the storm of a new decade, in a Europe that did not know peace would soon be shattered by war. Her childhood was not a parade of pearls and parties. It was hunger, it was fear, it was the silent hush of windows gone dark at night and the distant rumble of planes in the sky. The war found her in the Netherlands, where the world shrank to a single street, a single room, a single hope that tomorrow might be better. There were days when bread was only a memory. She learned to quiet her stomach with water and tulip bulbs, chewing slowly, because there would be nothing else. She watched, eyes wide, as soldiers marched by, as neighbors disappeared, as executions happened at the edge of her vision. And the sound of a gunshot meant you would never see someone again. She danced in secret, not for applause, but to raise coins for the resistance, to offer hope where there was none. She carried messages, tucked deep in her coat, across streets watched by men with guns. Each step was a quiet rebellion. Ballet saved her, not because it promised fame, but because it gave her something to hold on to, a kind of beauty that couldn't be taken by war. After peace finally arrived, Audrey was changed. She was taller than most, thinner too, the aftershocks of years with too little food. She dreamed of dancing on grand stages, but her body, shaped by hardship, refused to do everything she wished. So she turned, quietly, toward acting. It was not ambition that guided her, but necessity. A need to work, to eat, to find her place in a world that was putting itself back together. London in those years was gray with rain and rationing, but the theater lights still glimmered. Audrey found work wherever she could, sometimes as a chorus girl, sometimes just passing through a scene, a face you denotice for a moment and then forget. But something about her was impossible to forget. She moved with the fragile determination of someone who had survived. She didn't act so much as reveal, letting the audience see the longing and joy and pain beneath the surface. Then, as it often happens in the best stories, fate intervened. A celebrated French writer named Colette saw Audrey and decided, on the spot, that she would be the star of her Broadway play. In New York, the city that never sleeps, audiences sat up straight and noticed this newcomer, her luminous eyes and the careful way she carried herself. Hollywood noticed too, not with fanfare, but with a quiet invitation. In the early 50s, she found herself in front of the cameras in Rome, opposite the quietly powerful Gregory Peck, for a film about a runaway princess and a single day of freedom. Roman Holiday was the kind of magic that happens once, a film where the city is a character and youth feels eternal. Audrey, as Princess Anne, showed the world that vulnerability and dignity could live in the same body. She was 24, barely older than the dreamers in the audience, and overnight, everything changed. She held her Oscar with trembling hands, already thinking of her next role, already wondering if it was all a dream. She was not like the other stars who lit up the silver screen. She was not carved from glamour or fire. She was quiet, alert, every movement precise. Where others dazzled, she invited you in. While Marilyn Monroe gave the world a lesson in boldness and longing, Audrey showed a different side, one of wit, resilience, and a new kind of femininity that didn't need to shout to be noticed. Directors saw in her a new possibility, an answer to a question the world didn't know it was asking. From that moment, the stories flowed one after another. In Sabrina, she played the chauffeur's daughter transformed by Paris and the hope that love might cross any barrier. In Funny Face, she leapt down Parisian stairs in a swirl of color, more alive than any model could hope to be. In The Nun's Story, she traded fashion for faith, letting the camera linger on doubt and devotion. And then, in a role that would define an era, she stepped into a black dress, pearls at her neck, and stood before the glowing windows of Tiffany, S as Holly Golightly. Holly wasn't the party girl she seemed. She was a survivor, improvising a future, hiding her sorrow behind a bright smile and a cigarette holder. Audrey gave her life and complexity, a secret sadness that made millions fall in love, not just with the image, but with the truth behind the eyes. The world saw the style, the dress, the jewels, the elegance. But the secret was always her heart, her ability to make you feel that beauty could be gentle, even a little bit shy. The world of fashion was enchanted. Hubert de Givenchy, a young designer at the time, found his muse in Audrey. Together, they made a kind of magic, not just clothes, but symbols. The little black dress, the boat neck tops, the ballet flats, the cropped pants, these became not just a wardrobe, but a way of being. Audrey chose her own path. She wore what felt right, never just what was expected. Where others chased trends, she created them. To this day, every designer who sketches an elegant silhouette is, in some way, drawing her memory. But beneath the glamour, life was never simple. Her private world was quieter, sometimes sadder. Her first marriage to actor Mel Ferrer began with hope and ended in pain. Her second to Andrea Dotti, an Italian psychiatrist, brought her 2 sons, Sean and Luca, and then more heartache. Yet through it all, she guarded her privacy, holding sorrow and joy with the same gentle hands. She loved her children fiercely, choosing them again and again over the glitter of Hollywood. She knew what mattered and never let the world distract her from it. By the 1970s, Audrey stepped away from the spotlight. She wasn't finished with life, only finished with being a product for others to sell. In the quiet, she found her second act, one even more powerful than the first. Memories of war, of hunger, of cold nights never left her. When she heard about children suffering in distant places, she could not look away. The world had changed. Images of famine, of need, flickered across television screens, and for most, they became background noise. Not for Audrey. She joined UNICEF not for applause, but because she knew what it meant to have nothing and to be shown kindness. She traveled to Ethiopia, to Somalia, to Bangladesh, to the roughest places on earth. She wore simple clothes, tied her hair back, and listened. She brought no entourage, no press. In refugee camps, she sat in the dirt and let children climb into her lap. She sang lullabies, sometimes the same ones that comforted her in the dark years of war. She said once that as you grow older, you discover you have two hands, one for helping yourself, one for helping others. It was not just a phrase, but her code, her quiet vow to the world. Wherever she went, people felt her sincerity. She didn't show up for the cameras, she came for the people. For this, and for all the beauty she brought into the world, Audrey Hepburn was honored, but the awards didn't matter to her. In the early 90s, she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, one of the highest honors America could give. She accepted it softly, as if it belonged to everyone who ever needed hope. Not long after, in a quiet house in Switzerland, she died from cancer, surrounded by family at 63 years old. Her passing was not a shock, not a scandal, not a headline that burned bright and then faded. Instead, the world paused and remembered. They remembered the woman who smiled softly, who carried the weight of suffering with dignity, who never let her pain become bitterness. She had been a star, yes, but she never let herself believe she was above anyone. Her greatest gift was restraint, the rare courage to be humble in a world addicted to noise. Her legacy, immense and lasting, is everywhere. Every magazine that prints her face, every actress who chooses substance over scandal, every vintage shop that lines a window with black dresses and ballet flats. Young women study her, not for her fame, but for her grace, her humor, her refusal to let the world change her heart. She spoke 5 languages. She was shy, uneasy in crowds, happiest in quiet corners or with her little Yorkshire Terrier, Mr. Famous. She loved tulips maybe because, during the war, they kept her alive. She adored chocolate, especially after a hard day. And despite her image as a model of calm, she once admitted her greatest indulgence was a plate of pasta. And always there was that voice, a gentle murmur, a smile in every word, never raised, never hurried. She spoke softly, and so you listened harder. In a world that roared, she whispered. People leaned in. She was a still point in a turning world. So tonight, wherever you are, picture her for a moment. Not just the star, but the light. Imagine her at the window, coffee cup in hand, dreaming of something better. See her in a refugee camp, holding a child, humming a song older than memory. Remember her barefoot on Parisian stairs, laughing, dancing because life is short and beautiful and fleeting. Audrey Hepburn was not just an icon. She was a promise that kindness endures, and her light, unlike most, never, ever burns out. Here is the new, emotionally detailed and vivid retelling of James Dean's story, designed for audio and to grip the listener from the first seconds, with all numbers written as words and no subheadings. Na pe erika Cyrillic letter 456, ense Cyrillic letter 456. Ka o ero te ke yikratkoi, o pe yesu ke eras Cyrillic letter 457, ns yeri ka o u. Ya ke pe er o sele. James Dean exists somewhere out of time. He never got old. His face, always a little restless, the hair always slightly uncombed, the eyes carrying both hope and heartbreak, that is how the world remembers him. He isn't just a photograph in a red jacket or a rebel with a cigarette. He's an echo. He's a mystery, that never fully resolved. James Byron Dean arrived on a cold February day in a small Indiana town called Marion. He was the only child of Winton and Mildred Dean, a little boy who quickly learned that love is fragile. When his mother died from cancer, James was only 9. The grief was like a silent winter that never thawed. His father, unable to cope, sent James away to live with relatives in Fairmount, a town that moved at the quiet pace of farm life and Quaker rituals. There, he wandered the fields alone, full of questions, dreaming of something bigger than the endless rows of corn. He kept his mother's memory as a secret amulet, forever feeling like an outsider, forever missing something he could never recover. At school, he was different. He wasn't tough or loud. He was sensitive, drawn to art, music, and the little wonders no one else seemed to notice. He played sports but found more comfort in drawing, reading poetry, and acting out scenes from the movies he loved. In rural America, being different was a kind of invisible scar, but James learned to carry it with quiet stubbornness. Some said he was odd, some just said he was lost. After high school, with a restless heart and a suitcase full of sketches, he traveled west to California. The city sparkled with possibility, and at the University of California in Los Angeles, he found his place in the world of theater. There, he threw himself into acting with an intensity that sometimes frightened his classmates. James was all extremes, charming and difficult, shy and magnetic, a young man who seemed to burn from the inside out. He studied method acting, the new revolution sweeping American theater. In New York, he joined the Actors Studio, where he learned alongside giants like Marlon Brando and Montgomery Clift. Here, acting was no longer about pretending. It was about revealing, about letting your deepest wounds show. For James, this was salvation and torture. He would spend nights walking the city streets, reading poetry under flickering neon, searching for some truth he couldn't quite put into words. Hollywood didn't quite know what to do with him at first. He landed small roles on television, playing troubled young men and misfits. The camera seemed to love the contradiction in his face, boyish and ancient all at once, a smile that faded too quickly. Directors noticed, even if producers worried he was too much trouble, too unpredictable. And then came the turning point. Elia Kazan, one of Hollywood's great directors, cast James as Cal Trask in East of Eden. On screen, James didn't just act, he exposed himself. He took the wounds of a boy desperate for his father's love and turned them into lightning. He mumbled, he raged, he cried, he laughed. Nothing felt rehearsed. Everything felt dangerously real. The critics were stunned. Audiences saw themselves in his confusion, his longing, his rebellion. For that role, he received an Academy Award nomination, posthumous, the first of its kind for an actor so young. He was just 24, but it was his next role that sealed his place in the mythology of youth. In Rebel Without a Cause, James played Jim Stark, a teenager lost in a world of plastic smiles and shallow rules. Wearing a red windbreaker, he slouched and sulked and bared his soul. It was more than a performance. It was a manifesto for a generation that felt unheard. He didn't look like a movie star. He looked like a real kid, hurt and angry, full of questions no one wanted to answer. Teenagers everywhere saw themselves in him. Adults saw a threat, or maybe just the truth they didn't want to face. His final film, Giant, was an epic set in Texas, where James aged decades in the span of hours on screen. He began as a rough ranch hand and ended as a bitter oil tycoon. The transformation showed a depth and range that hinted at the career the world would never get to see. For this role, too, he would be nominated for an Oscar, another award that would come after he was gone. Off camera, James Dean was full of contradictions. He loved fiercely but pushed people away. He was both introverted and hungry for connection, the life of the party and the one sitting quietly in the shadows, lost in thought. He had friendships with both men and women, and gossip about his private life was endless. He drove too fast. He lived too fast. He quoted The Little Prince, played bongo drums at parties, listened to jazz and classical records late into the night, scribbled poetry in notebooks he never shared. He worried he wasn't good enough. He ached for approval, yet couldn't stand to be told what to do. He was a perfectionist and a mess, sometimes both in the same day. James loved cars, perhaps because speed felt like a kind of escape. He raced professionally, dreaming of a career on the track. His most beloved possession was a silver Porsche 550 Spider, which he named Little Bastard. Friends warned him the car was dangerous. He joked about not making it to 30, as if tempting fate. On the last day of September, James set off for a race in Salinas, California. The sky was bright, the air full of promise and the roar of engines. He was behind the wheel, feeling invincible, alive. On the highway, another car turned suddenly, and in a flash it was over. James Dean died instantly. He was only 24 years old. News traveled fast, and the world stopped in shock. 3 films, that was it. And yet it was enough. His face, those sharp cheekbones, haunted eyes, the mouth set in defiance, appeared everywhere. On posters, buttons, t-shirts, dorm walls. The red jacket became more than costume. It became a flag for anyone who ever felt misunderstood, who ever wanted to scream, but only managed a whisper. James Dean wasn't just an actor. He was a rupture in the smooth surface of 1950s America. He made vulnerability look powerful. He was the first to show on screen what it meant to hurt and not hide it. Every brooding heartthrob that followed Marlon Brando, River Phoenix, Johnny Depp, Timothée Chalamet, owes something to the path he burned in just a handful of years. He was nearsighted, wore glasses when the cameras weren't rolling, and had a Siamese cat named Marcus, a gift from Elizabeth Taylor. He once parked cars to pay the bills, and spent long hours writing soulful letters to friends and strangers, searching for a bridge between life and death, hoping to last just a little longer in the memory of those who cared. He loved books, especially poetry and philosophy, always asking the big questions, always dreaming of something just beyond reach. His story ended before Elvis went to the army, before Marilyn Monroe left the world, before the 60s turned America upside down. Maybe that's why he remains forever young. He doesn't belong to any single era, he belongs to all of them. He was a spark, brilliant, brief, unforgettable. So tonight, close your eyes and listen for the soft echo of an engine far away, and the whisper of a boy who never grew old. Somewhere, always 24, James Dean leans against a car, stares at the horizon, and dares us to dream as if we'll live forever, and to live as if we might die today. If James Dean was a spark that set the screen alight, Judy Garland was the song that lingered in the air long after the curtain fell. She didn't just sing. She poured her whole being into every note, her heart never hidden, her pain transformed into something glorious and impossible to forget. Judy was born Frances Ethel Gumm on a June day, in a small Minnesota town with winters that could freeze even the bravest dreams. The youngest of 3 sisters in a family that lived and breathed vaudeville, she made her first entrance under the hot stage lights before her 2nd birthday. The stage was home with its velvet curtains and musty smells, its painted faces and late-night laughter. The Gumm sisters traveled from town to town, living out of suitcases, chasing applause, sharing secrets and songs. Even as a child, Judy was different. Her voice, so big and rich it startled audiences, would hush even the rowdiest crowds. There was a wisdom in her singing, a longing that seemed too deep for someone so small. Hollywood took notice. MGM, the most powerful studio in the world, called her out to California. By the time she was 13, she had signed a contract, traded her family name for the magic of Garland, and entered a world of blinding lights, endless rehearsals, and expectations higher than the spotlights above her head. The studio loved her talent, but worried about her looks. They wanted her thinner, more wide-eyed, eternally young. So began the cycle, little white pills to stay awake, others to sleep. A pharmacy in her dressing room before she was even old enough to drive. Still, Judy Garland sparkled. At 17, she put on a blue gingham dress and stepped onto the yellow brick road as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. Her performance was full of wonder and trembling hope, her voice carrying over the rainbow across generations. The song won an Oscar. The movie became legend. The girl from Grand Rapids, Minnesota, became a star. But behind the magic, the shadows grew. MGM kept her working without rest, pairing her with Mickey Rooney in musical after musical, selling sunshine to a country at war. The world saw the big smile and shining eyes, but behind the scenes, Judy struggled with anxiety, exhaustion, and the growing chains of addiction. She tried to leave. She was fired. She fought her way back. The cycle repeated, and through it all, her voice never faltered. She could be breaking apart, but when she sang, she soared. Listen to her in The Man That Got Away from A Star Is Born. The heartbreak in every line is real, the comeback so raw it leaves you breathless. She should have won the Oscar, everyone agreed. The loss was a wound that never quite healed. Judy's life offstage was a storm of passion and heartbreak. She married 5 times, her relationships full of longing, fire, and sometimes chaos. She had 3 children, and though her time was often stolen by studios and spotlights, she loved them fiercely. Her daughter, Liza Minnelli, would inherit that same mixture of grit and stardust, dazzling the world in her own way. Money came and went, fame flared and faded, but Judy kept getting back up. They called her fragile, but the truth is, fragile things do not survive decades in the heartless machine of Hollywood. Judy was tough as iron, singing through tears and troubles, filling concert halls to the rafters. In 1961, she performed at Carnegie Hall in what critics still call the greatest night in show business history. Her voice wrapped around every soul in the room, velvet and thunder all at once, a sound so beautiful it hurt. The price of her magic was high. Years of overwork, painkillers, and heartbreak took their toll. By the summer of 1969, she was living in London, far from the land of Oz, fighting to stay afloat. On a quiet June morning, the news spread Judy Garland had died, just 47 years old. The world seemed to stop. Fans gathered in the streets, singing "Over the Rainbow" through their tears, remembering the girl who had taught them to dream, and the woman who had shown them that even broken hearts could shine. Yet Judy's light never faded. She remains a guidepost for anyone who ever felt lost or out of place, a reminder that showing your pain can be a kind of strength. She was the first great star to let her vulnerability shine brighter than her jewels. Her presence was enormous. She stood barely 5 feet tall, but she could fill a stage and silence a crowd with just a look. She was the youngest ever to receive the Cecil B. DeMille Award for Lifetime Achievement. She loved dogs and kept a little cairn terrier named Toto. Yes, the very one from Oz. Off stage, she was famous for her wicked sense of humor, as quick to laugh at herself as to tease a friend. She became an icon, especially for those who needed hope most. The LGBTQ community found in her a kindred spirit. Her pain, her resilience, her campy sense of drama all resonated deeply. In those years, a friend of Dorothy was secret code for someone gay, a tiny rebellion in a world that punished difference. When the Stonewall riots erupted in New York just days after her funeral, some whispered that Judy's passing had lit the spark. Whether or not it's true, her spirit was there, defiant, dazzling, impossible to erase. Why was Judy Garland special? Because in a world of painted smiles and perfect illusions, she let you see the cracks. She made you believe that magic and pain could live side by side, that even when you fall, you can stand back up and sing. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine her voice wrapping around your heart, as soft as velvet, as sharp as sunlight. Picture her in ruby slippers, skipping beneath technicolor skies, chasing dreams so far and so high that even now, somewhere over the rainbow, Judy Garland is still singing. Before the world knew the name Muhammad Ali, there was a boy in Louisville who burned with a restless energy and a wild sense of justice. His name was Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr., and he did not arrive in this world quietly. Even as a child, he seemed to fill a room. Laughter, arguments, his voice always a little louder, his eyes always searching. His family was working class. His father painted signs. His mother raised children with a gospel backbone and soft hands that never gave up. The city was alive with jazz and church choirs, but split by invisible lines of color and privilege. Cassius was 12 when his beloved red bicycle disappeared, stolen while he was inside a store buying a soda. The loss was more than just a theft. It was an insult, a slap, a call to arms. He stormed into the police station, vowing to find the thief and teach him a lesson. There, fate waited in the form of Joe Martin, a policeman and boxing coach. "Learn to fight first," the officer said, half amused, half prophetic. So Cassius did. He stepped into a battered old gym, tasted sweat and leather, and found his calling not in vengeance, but in discipline. His rage turned to rhythm. His feet found their dance. Soon the boy who wanted revenge was chasing trophies. Golden gloves, local titles, state titles. The gym was where he belonged, the ring his stage. He talked as much as he punched, maybe more. He was cocky, hilarious, infuriating, impossible to ignore. He rhymed predictions before every bout, called himself pretty, called himself unbeatable. For a young black boy in America, where pride was often punished and humility demanded, Cassius Clay's bravado was not just personality. It was an act of rebellion, a shield, a spotlight he claimed for himself. He was beautiful, he was fast. He won gold at the Rome Olympics in 1960, light heavyweight division, his hand raised, his smile flashing for the world. Not long after, he turned professional, racking up victory after victory, his record shining, his reputation growing with every fight and every rhyme. Some called him arrogant, but fans could not look away. Then came the fight that would shock the world. In 1964, Cassius faced Sonny Liston, a champion with fists like anvils and a glare that chilled even the boldest. Cassius was a 7-1 underdog, almost expected to lose. But under the lights, he floated and stung, dodged and jabbed, danced around the bear-like Liston until the giant quit on his stool after 6 rounds. The ring erupted. "I shook up the world," he screamed, his voice echoing past the cameras, past the cheers, into legend. But the real earthquake came the next day. Cassius Clay stood before the press and announced he was now Muhammad Ali. He had joined the Nation of Islam, embraced a new faith, a new name, a new identity. The media bristled. Sports writers refused to acknowledge his new self. But Ali stood firm. "I am Ali," he declared. "I will not answer to the name of a slave." It was not just a name change, it was a challenge, a line drawn in history. He would fight not just in the ring, but everywhere. Then came Vietnam. In 1967, at the height of his career, Ali was called to be drafted into the United States Army. He refused, citing his faith and his conscience. "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong," he said, his voice clear and steady. The price was immediate and harsh. Boxing authorities stripped his title. He was banned from fighting, his passport taken, his income gone. He was 25, undefeated, exiled at the very moment he should have been invincible. But Ali never stopped speaking. He traveled the country, visiting universities, debating politicians, confronting racism, war, and injustice. For some, he was a traitor, a draft dodger. For others, he was a hero, the first major athlete to stand so publicly for his beliefs, to risk everything for what he believed was right. His courage sparked movements, inspired generations. Eventually, the Supreme Court overturned his conviction, but those 3 lost years were never returned. He came back changed, maybe even more dangerous. His fights became more than sport. They were epic, almost mythic. In 1971, Ali faced Joe Frazier in what was billed as the fight of the century. 2 undefeated champions, 2 styles, 2 stories. Ali lost that night, but the war between them was just beginning. He avenged that loss in 1974, and then in Zaire came the rumble in the jungle. Against George Foreman, a younger, stronger, undefeated champion, Ali was written off by almost everyone. But in the African heat, surrounded by chanting crowds, Ali invented the rope-a-dope. He absorbed Foreman's thunderous punches, let his opponent tire himself out, and in the 8th round, unleashed a storm of his own. Foreman hit the mat. Ali stood over him, arms raised, champion once more. Then came Manila, the 3rd and final meeting with Frazier. The thriller in Manila was brutal, almost inhuman. 2 men pushed past all limits. Ali won by technical knockout when Frazier could no longer see, could no longer continue. Afterward, Ali said it was the closest he had come to death. The victories continued, but time is undefeated. The speed faded, the punches landed harder. Ali kept fighting into the early 1980s, but the magic was slipping away. He retired with 56 wins, 5 losses, and a legacy that stretched far beyond the ropes. Then came a cruel twist, Parkinson's disease, slowly robbing him of his speed, his voice, his quicksilver wit. But even in silence, he roared. Muhammad Ali became more than a retired champion. He was a global citizen, a humanitarian, a symbol. He traveled to war zones and refugee camps, brokered peace, negotiated for hostages. In 1996, he lit the Olympic flame in Atlanta, his hand shaking but his spirit unbreakable. The world watched in tears, seeing not weakness, but the fire of a lifetime. He was banned from boxing at age 25 and returned a legend. He recorded albums of poetry, performed magic tricks for children, and once talked a man out of suicide on a Lowe's Angels rooftop. He married 4 times, raised 9 children, and carried stories in his memory like other men carry scars. He received the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2005, one of countless honors. Why was he special? Because he refused to be quiet, because he called out injustice, made blackness beautiful, made bravery visible. He made boxing into a ballet, politics into poetry. Service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth, he said, and he paid in full. Muhammad Ali transcended the sport that made him famous. He stood tall when others bowed, danced when others stumbled. Somewhere beyond the lights, beyond the bell, he is still floating, still stinging, still shaking up the world. There are stars, and then there is Elizabeth Taylor, a woman who never simply shone, but set the whole sky on fire. Some people called her eyes violet, others said they were the color of mystery, but everyone agreed they had never seen anything like them. Elizabeth was born in a quiet, elegant neighborhood of London in the last days of February, her full name already sounding regal. Elizabeth Rosamond Taylor. Her parents, Americans by passport and ambition carried the old world's elegance and the new world's dreams in their suitcases. London was swirling toward war, but inside her childhood home, there was laughter, art, and the endless curiosity of a girl who wanted to touch everything. When Elizabeth was just 7, her family left England behind, setting sail for the promise of Hollywood. The city they arrived in was sunlit and golden, but buzzing with the business of make-believe. Her mother, herself a former actress, wasted no time introducing Elizabeth to every studio that mattered. It wasn't long before someone noticed the porcelain-skinned, dark-haired girl with eyes that caught the light in a way that made people stop talking and just stare. By the age of 12, Elizabeth was already a star. In National Velvet, she played a brave young girl who disguised herself as a boy just to chase a dream on horseback. The film made her a household name overnight, but the world she had entered was not a fairy tale. The studio told her what to eat, how to dress, even which friends she could see. She learned quickly that Hollywood loved to make stars, and then tried to shape them like diamonds, perfect and unbreakable. Growing up on camera, Elizabeth saw everything. By the time she was a teenager, she already understood loneliness and exhaustion, even as her face smiled out from every magazine. The 1950s brought a new Elizabeth, no longer a child, but a woman who could smolder, rage, seduce, and mourn, sometimes all in the same scene. In A Place in the Sun, Giant, and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, she showed the world that beauty was not her only weapon. Her voice was low and smoky, her laughter sharp, her gaze enough to stop the bravest man in his tracks. She was not the girl next door. She was the woman people dreamed of and sometimes feared. And then came Cleopatra. The role was supposed to be her crowning glory, but instead it became a storm. The production was cursed with endless delays, wild spending, and more drama off camera than on. On set, Elizabeth met Richard Burton, a man as brilliant and self-destructive as she was. Their affair began in the glare of cameras, their passion so volcanic that newspapers ran out of words to describe it. She was still married to Eddie Fisher. He was still married too, but none of that stopped them. The Vatican itself condemned the scandal, but Elizabeth and Richard only fell deeper in love. They married, divorced, remarried, and finally parted for good, but never stopped loving each other in their own fierce, chaotic way. Through it all, Elizabeth kept acting, kept fighting. She survived near-fatal illnesses that left her in hospital beds more times than she could count. She battled addiction, faced down gossip, and lost friends she loved deeply. But each time life knocked her down, she came back more dazzling than before, diamonds in her ears and fire in her veins. On screen, in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, she won her second Oscar, playing Martha with a wild humor and a raw vulnerability that shattered the last doubts about her talent. But Elizabeth Taylor was never just a star in front of a camera. When her dear friend Rock Hudson died of AIDS, Elizabeth did not shrink from the crisis, as so many in Hollywood did. She became a fighter, raising money, making speeches, showing up for those the world tried to ignore. She founded the American Foundation for AIDS Research. and then the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation, turning her fame into real power. Her work raised hundreds of millions for research and care, changing countless lives, giving hope and a human face to a generation in fear. Her life was lived in headlines. 8 marriages to 7 men, every love story its own storm, every heartbreak a lesson in resilience. She was never afraid to start over, to love too much, or to walk away if she needed to. She had 3 Oscars, 2 for acting, 1 for her humanitarian work. Her perfume empire made her the queen of white diamonds. Her jewelry collection became legend, filled with stones so large they seemed to have their own gravity. She was famously late, gloriously unpredictable, loved her animals as much as her diamonds, and collected friends like rare treasures. Her best friend was Michael Jackson. Her goddaughter is Paris Jackson. She could tell a dirty joke better than any sailor, and she smoked with the same unapologetic glamour as she wore her jewels. Elizabeth Taylor was authentic in a world that rewards pretending. She lived large, loved fiercely, and never apologized for being too much. When she laughed, it was real, full-throated, unashamed. When she was angry, everyone in the room knew it. And when the camera rolled, she made you believe in both beauty and pain, sometimes in the very same breath. She died in March at the age of 79, but the calendar means little. Elizabeth Taylor has never really left us. She lives in every laugh that rings too loudly, every jewel that catches the sun, every heart that refuses to apologize for wanting too much from life. Somewhere right now, Liz is raising a glass, tossing off a wicked line, and reminding the world that legends are not born. They are forged in love, in loss, in fire, and in a violet flame that never fades. Some voices vanish with time. Frank Sinatra's only grew stronger. He was more than just a singer in a sharp suit and a tilted fedora. He was a country's swagger, a glimmer in the eye of a century, a smoky song curled around midnight, and a wink that made you believe in magic. When he sang, it felt like a secret whispered just for you, or a toast in a corner booth that no one else could hear. Sinatra's story began on a winter day in 1915, in a cramped apartment in Hoboken, New Jersey. He was born as Francis Albert Sinatra, and even his arrival was dramatic. A baby so large and stubborn he had to be pulled into the world with forceps, leaving a scar on his cheek and his eardrum forever marked. Maybe it was fate telling him from the first breath that ordinary wasn't for him. His parents were Italian immigrants. His mother, Dolly, was a firecracker in politics and the heart of the neighborhood, a woman with a voice that could command a crowd or calm a frightened child. His father, Marty, was a boxer and later a firefighter. Tough, dependable, the kind of man who built safety from nothing. Young Frank was never a musical prodigy. He didn't read notes. He just listened, soaking up everything from the radio. Jazz pouring in from the city, the sound of laughter and fights and clinking glasses in every Italian kitchen in Hoboken. He watched Bing Crosby and dreamed of being just as easy and cool, but with his own twist. He dropped out of high school, tried odd jobs, but only music pulled him forward. He hustled. He got up on tiny stages in smoky rooms, sang for nickels, and learned that every crowd could be won over if you sang from the gut, if you made them feel like the only ones in the room. In his early 20s, Frank started singing with the big bands, first Harry James, then Tommy Dorsey. With those orchestras behind him, his voice soared. Girls screamed, boys started slicking back their hair, and America found a new sound to fall in love with. The country was heading into war. Frank's voice became the soundtrack of longing, of waiting, of hope. Songs like "I'll Be Seeing You" drifted through open windows and crackled from radios, connecting lonely hearts across oceans. He didn't just sing the melody. He gave every word a heartbeat. His phrasing was revolutionary, making each pause and breath matter as much as the notes themselves. But the world is fickle. By the 50s, tastes had changed. The screaming crowds of Bobby Soxers had moved on, and record sales tumbled. Hollywood forgot his number. Some said his magic had faded. Frank was written off, but he never did like being underestimated. He fought for a role in From Here to Eternity, begged for the chance, even took a pay cut. When the cameras rolled, he poured every heartbreak, every late night, every disappointment into that performance. The result? An Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, and suddenly Sinatra was back. Not just back, but bigger than ever. The late 50s and 60s became the Sinatra Golden Age. He recorded albums like In the Wee Small Hours, songs for swingin' lovers and Only the Lonely. He turned pop songs into art, moods into music, heartbreak into something you could sway to in the dark. He started his own label, Reprise Records, so he could call the shots, record what he wanted, and tell the world how it should sound. He packed arenas, starred in films from The Man with the Golden Arm to The Manchurian Candidate, and proved that charm and pain could share the same stage. And then there was the Rat Pack. Frank, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop, kings of Las Vegas. Their shows were wild, funny, a little dangerous, filled with drinks, stories, inside jokes, and a sense that anything could happen. Frank made sure the glitz wasn't just for show. He fought for Sammy, refusing to perform where his friend wasn't welcome, taking a stand for civil rights even when it cost him. Beneath the bravado, he had a code, and he lived by it. Sinatra's personal life was a storm of headlines and romance. 4 marriages. Nancy Barbato, the first love who stood by him when he had nothing. Ava Gardner, fiery, unforgettable, a love story that burned too bright. Mia Farrow, a gentle spirit, the briefest of interludes. Barbara Marx, his final companion who brought calm after decades of noise. He had 3 children, hundreds of affairs, and enough drama to fill a dozen gossip columns. He was loyal to friends, vengeful to enemies, generous and demanding in equal measure. Frank was full of quirks. He feared elevators. He owned over 200 tuxedos, and every stage he played had to have the right lighting or he'd refuse to perform. He could memorize entire scripts and songs in a single sitting, nailing his vocals in just one take if the mood was right. He was banned from Australia for a while after insulting the press. He was friends with presidents and rumored to have ties with the underworld, but whatever the gossip, he was always unapologetically himself. his music became the pulse of America. Fly Me to the Moon played as astronauts walked on the lunar surface. Strangers in the Night, New York, New York, and My Way, these weren't just hits, they became American scripture. My Way especially. Frank didn't just sing that song, he lived it, accepting his regrets but never letting them own him. Sinatra won 11 Grammys, including a Lifetime Achievement Award, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and the Congressional Gold Medal. When he died in May of 1998, the Empire State Building glowed blue in his honor, and across the world, old friends, new fans, and strangers alike raised a glass. Why did Frank Sinatra matter? Because he combined elegance with edge, because he understood that timing is everything in song, in love, in life, because he could make you laugh, make you weep, make you feel cool even on your worst day. Sinatra didn't follow trends, he invented them. He was a lullaby and a riot, a lover and a fighter, the heartbeat of a century. So tonight, as you drift off to the soft swing of strings and the clink of ice in a glass, imagine Frank somewhere out there, tucks crisp, eyes bright, singing one last line beneath the cosmic spotlight. The best is always yet to come. If America ever had a voice, it was Aretha Franklin's, thundering and gentle, velvet and fire, forever unforgettable. She didn't just sing. She transformed every song into a story, every note into truth, every stage into her kingdom. Her music was more than entertainment. It was revelation, a force that made you sit up, pay attention, and believe in something bigger than yourself. Aretha's journey began in Memphis, Tennessee, on a March day in the early 1940s. Her world was full of music and movement, prayers and possibility. The Franklins' home was never silent. Her father, the Reverend C.L. Franklin, was already a legend, a preacher with a voice said to be worth $1 million, a man whose sermons made people cry and sing in equal measure. The house in Detroit, where the family moved soon after her birth, was a magnet for legends. Aretha grew up hearing Mahalia Jackson's gospel soar through the living room, watching Martin Luther King Jr. drop by for Sunday dinner, listening to musicians and activists plan a new America at her kitchen table. But joy and sorrow were always side by side. Aretha's mother, Barbara, a gospel singer and pianist herself, died when Aretha was just 10. That loss hollowed out a piece of her heart and filled her voice with an ache that would never fade. Even as a child, she understood that music was not just for celebration, but for healing, for remembering, for holding the world together when it felt like it might break apart. She started singing in her father's church, fingers dancing over the piano keys, voice already rich and raw, too big for her small body. The first time she recorded gospel songs as a teenager, people stopped in their tracks, stunned by the power and truth in every note. She did not need training. Her soul was her teacher. At 18, Aretha took her dreams to New York City and signed with Columbia Records. They tried to shape her into a jazz and pop singer, polished, smooth, elegant, but the fire stayed hidden, smoldering just out of reach. Only when she moved to Atlantic Records did everything change. In 1967, her very first single there was "I Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You." It was thunder. It was lightning. In just a few minutes, she changed the sound of American music forever. Then came Respect. Aretha didn't just cover Otis Redding's song, she transformed it. She spelled it out, shouted it, demanded it, and gave it a groove that could move mountains. That word, respect, became a rallying cry for women, for Black America, for anyone who'd ever felt invisible. The song climbed to #1 and never let go of the world's heart. One hit followed another, each a storm. You make me feel like a natural woman. Think, Chain of Fools, Rock Steady, Bridge Over Troubled Water. Aretha didn't cover songs, she conquered them. Every melody became her own, wrapped in heartbreak, hope, defiance, and joy. She was more than just a voice. She was a pianist, a producer, an arranger, a woman who called the shots in an industry where women almost never did. She demanded the best. In the studio, Aretha chose her own musicians, ran the sessions, and expected everyone to keep up. Her power was not in shouting or posturing, but in being absolute, in knowing her worth and refusing to settle for less. Aretha was always deeply connected to the world beyond music. She funded marches, performed at benefits, marched with Dr. King, and sang at his memorial after his assassination. She was there for Rosa Parks. She sang for Presidents Clinton, Obama, and at Obama's inauguration, her gray felt hat with its jeweled bow became an instant legend. She was a feminist icon before the world even had a word for it in pop music. She wore furs and diamonds, not for fashion, but for pride, for survival, for claiming her own space in a world that often tried to shrink her. In 1980, a new generation met Aretha through the Blues Brothers, where she belted out Think in a diner apron and stole the whole movie. In 1998, when Luciano Pavarotti fell ill at the Grammys, Aretha stepped in with no rehearsal and sang Nessun Dorma. The opera world fell silent, awestruck. There was only Aretha, her voice filling every corner, every heart. She won 18 Grammy Awards. She was the first woman inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. She performed at the funerals of Dr. King and Rosa Parks, and when the world needed healing, Aretha's voice was there. She was famously private, fiercely protective of her art and her family. She had 4 sons. She survived heartbreak, domestic abuse, battles with addiction, career slumps, and always found a way to rise again. She loved cheeseburgers, soap operas, fur coats, even in summer, and insisted on being paid in cash up front, tucking her fee into her purse and setting it on the piano before every show. She had honorary doctorates from Yale, Princeton, Harvard, call her doctor. Aretha, and she'd flash that knowing smile. She was not always easy. Sometimes she was stubborn, sometimes tough. She could be difficult, and she was unapologetically herself. But when she sang, everyone listened. Her pain turned to power, her power to song. Aretha Franklin died in August 2018 of pancreatic cancer. The world mourned. Her funeral was a 10-hour gospel celebration, a symphony of tributes from presidents and preachers, pop stars and people who had simply felt seen and healed by her voice. She earned every minute. Why did Aretha matter? Because she was the living definition of soul, not as a style, but as a state of being. Because she turned sorrow into hope, and hope into music that made the world stronger. Because she gave a voice to those who had none. When you hear her now, you hear not just a song, but a whole life, a whole world, rising up in every note. So tonight, picture Aretha at the piano, wrapped in a halo of stage lights, singing for everyone who ever needed a miracle. Not just a queen, the queen. Alfred Hitchcock never needed to shout or run. He commanded attention with a whisper, a pause, a single shadow trembling on the wall. He was the master of suspense, a portly Englishman with eyes always half smiling, half calculating, as if he knew your secret nightmares and was about to reveal them, one slow frame at a time. His films did not just scare you. They taught you to be afraid of your own imagination. His story began on an August afternoon at the end of the 19th century, in a quiet corner of Leytonstone, England. The world was still moving at the pace of horse-drawn carts, and little Alfred Joseph Hitchcock was born into a home ruled by discipline and ritual. His father, William, sold vegetables in a small shop, a place filled with the smells of earth and hard work. His mother, Emma, was stern, devout, always watching, making sure young Alfred knew the rules. Their home was neat, silent, almost holy in its order. The church was everywhere, in the candles, the silence, the endless reminders of sin and redemption. Alfred grew up in a world where fear and guilt were more than feelings, they were tools. One story, repeated like a warning bell through his life, told of the day his father sent him to the police station with a note. The officers, following instructions, locked little Alfred in a cell for a few minutes to show him what happens to bad boys. He never forgot the terror of that moment, the confusion, the humiliation, the sense that the world could turn on you in an instant and leave you powerless. It was a lesson he would pass on, again and again, through his films. That fear is quiet, and it hides in plain sight. As a young man, Alfred studied engineering and fine arts at the University of London, but he found himself drawn to the new, mysterious world of film. The silent studios of Islington became his laboratory. He began as a designer of title cards for silent pictures, learning how to tell a story with a single glance, a flicker of light, a carefully chosen word. His background in engineering made him obsessed with structure. His artist's eye taught him to frame emotion with shadow and line. By the mid-20s, Alfred Hitchcock had directed his first film, and soon after, The Lodger established him as a rising master of mood and mystery. In Britain, he made thrillers that felt like puzzles: The Man Who Knew Too Much, The 39 Steps, The Lady Vanishes. He became obsessed with the idea of the wrong man, someone accused, hunted, driven to desperation. His movies turned the ordinary, a train, a staircase, a glass of milk, into symbols of threat. It was as if he wanted the world to know, trust nothing, question everything, especially the things that seem most harmless. Hollywood called at the end of the 30s. He crossed the Atlantic, carrying not just a suitcase but a head full of dark dreams. His first American film, Rebecca, won the Academy Award for Best Picture, a Gothic story of jealousy, memory, and the ghosts that linger after love is gone. Hitchcock never won an Oscar for directing, but his influence only deepened. He reimagined the American suburb as a place of quiet menace in Shadow of a Doubt, his personal favorite. He danced with censors in Notorious, smuggling forbidden romance onto the screen with sly edits, and the longest kiss Hollywood had ever seen, chopped into tiny fragments to outwit the rules. But Hitchcock was never satisfied to repeat himself. He was a technician and an inventor. In Rope, he staged the whole film to look like a single, unbroken shot. In Rear Window, he turned one apartment courtyard into a universe of paranoia and longing. Vertigo dove deep into obsession and identity, a dreamy nightmare that baffled audiences then, but now sits atop lists of the greatest films ever made. North by Northwest took Cary Grant across America, turning national monuments into stages for suspense. And then there was Psycho. With a shoestring budget and a television crew, Hitchcock broke every rule. He killed his star 45 minutes in and made audiences scream in the shower. The stabbing strings, the quick cuts, the shock, it was a cultural earthquake. Hitchcock smiled. He had taught the world to fear what it couldn't see. He followed it with The Birds, where terror came with a flap of wings, and the silence between attacks was as frightening as any scream. Not every film was a masterpiece, but every film tried something new. Marnie, Torn Curtain, Frenzy, always daring, sometimes unsettling. His methods, especially with actresses like Tippi Hedren, drew criticism later. He was known to be controlling, even cruel, when chasing his vision. The shadows in his films sometimes seemed to come from his own life. Hitchcock prepared every shot like a blueprint, planning with the precision of an architect. "Once the screenplay is finished," he joked, "I'd just as soon not make the film at all." For him, the thrill was in building the idea, imagining every twist and turn. He understood branding before anyone called it that. His cameo appearances became a signature, a private wink to every devoted fan. He was a man of odd habits. He hated eggs, called them revolting. He never learned to drive. He preferred blondes in his films, arguing they were more shocking in moments of terror. He sent crates of smoked herrings as pranks, and his humor was as dry as old gin. Yet behind the wit was a mind always calculating, always searching for the next way to make the heart beat faster. He was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II, but died before he could truly enjoy the honor. On a spring day in 1980, Alfred Hitchcock left this world, but not its shadows. Why was he special? Because he taught us that what hides in the silence is often more frightening than what screams in the light. Because he made fear elegant and turned our own imaginations against us. So tonight, as you turn out the lights, glance once more at the door, the window, the shadows on your wall. Somewhere in the flicker of a reflection or the curve of a silhouette, Hitchcock is still watching. And if you ever sense a chill and a sly smile just behind you, the suspense, you'll realize, is far from over. Here is the unique, detailed, and emotionally layered retelling of Jackie Kennedy's story, crafted for audio and rich with living detail and atmosphere. US Cyrillic letter 456, CHSLANAPSAN Cyrillic letter 456, SLOVAME, FAKT IZBYE ERYEJYENO. VK Cyrillic letter 456, NC Cyrillic letter 456, M Cyrillic letter 456, N Cyrillic letter 456 SOPS, UK AS Cyrillic letter 457, NS Yeri KAU. Jackie Kennedy moved through the world as if she were made of grace and quiet strength. She was elegance in motion, and even in stillness, she could hold a room in the palm of her hand. Her words were soft, often barely above a whisper, but her silences could be sharper than any rebuke. Jacqueline Lee Bouvier, as she was born in the height of a Southampton summer, seemed marked for something rare from the very beginning. Her childhood was painted in soft pastels and sharp contrasts. She was raised among the manicured lawns and whispering trees of Long Island, but behind every privilege there was pressure. Her father, John Black Jack Bouvier, sparkled at parties, charming, dangerous, never quite reliable. Her mother, Janet Lee, was strict, ambitious, determined to give her daughters every advantage she had missed. Jackie learned early that beauty was a language, but so was discipline, and both could be used as armor. She grew up fluent in French, a lover of horses, books, and solitary walks along the sea. She dreamed in foreign languages and found comfort in quiet places where she could disappear into a story. She went to Vassar, spent a year in Paris, and finished at George Washington University, wandering the city's marble corridors with her sketchbook and an eye for detail. At 22, she began working as the inquiring camera girl for the Washington Times-Herald, asking strangers questions, searching for stories beneath the surface of daily life. Even then, her curiosity was matched by a certain restraint. Jackie collected secrets the way some people collect rare coins. It was in the swirl of Capitol parties and society weddings that Jackie met a young senator from Massachusetts, John F. Kennedy. He was dazzling, all ambition and charisma, his smile a flashbulb that could light up any room. Their wedding was called the event of the decade, a glittering affair that set the standard for what Americans would come to call Camelot. But real life was never quite so golden. Jackie suffered miscarriages and the pain of a stillbirth, her grief hidden behind careful poise and public smiles. She became a mother to Caroline, then John Jr., holding her family together while the world watched every move. When JFK became president, Jackie found herself in the White House at just 31, and the country watched, breathless, as she transformed the role of First Lady. She was not content to simply host tea parties or plan state dinners. Instead, she launched a meticulous restoration of the White House, searching antique shops by moonlight, poring over catalogs, arguing with curators about the smallest details. She made the residence into a living museum, a stage for American history. When she gave a televised tour in 1962, more than 56 million people tuned in, a nation pausing to follow her soft voice through gilded halls. She won an Emmy for her effort, But what mattered more was the sense of wonder she restored to the heart of American politics. Jackie became a symbol far beyond her husband's presidency. She was as comfortable quoting Greek philosophers as she was charming French dignitaries, her words slipping seamlessly from English to French to Spanish, each syllable elegant and exact. She wore Oleg Cassini and pillbox hats, started trends without trying, and yet she guarded her children's privacy fiercely. Her smile was enigmatic, her gaze often distant, as if she were watching the world from behind a glass wall. And then everything changed. Dallas, November, a pink Chanel suit stained forever with loss. In one searing moment, Jackie became a widow, and the world's focus shifted from her style to her strength. She arranged her husband's funeral with a composer's care for symbolism, invoking Abraham Lincoln's procession, setting an eternal flame at Arlington that flickers even now. In her quiet, unwavering dignity, she gave the nation a language for grief and for hope. "There will be great presidents again," she said, "but there will never be another Camelot." Tragedy found her again in 1968 when Robert Kennedy was killed. That same year, she startled the public by marrying Aristotle Onassis, the Greek shipping magnate. For Jackie, it was less a grand romance than a shield, security, privacy, protection for her children in a world grown dangerous. Many Americans judged her, but Jackie always moved ahead of the public, her choices guided by what was necessary, not just what was expected. After Onassis's death, Jackie rebuilt her life once more, this time not as a public figure, but as a private citizen. In her 40s, she started a new career as a book editor in New York, first at Viking Press and later at Doubleday. She worked quietly, guiding major literary works into the world. Colleagues found her sharp, diligent, and often wickedly funny proof that her mind was as formidable as her image. Jackie avoided the spotlight, spending afternoons sailing off Martha's Vineyard, reading voraciously, and surrounding herself with art and trusted friends. She adored chocolate cake, cherished her children, and valued loyalty above all. She had her rituals, a certain way she smoked, books always close at hand, a quiet smile that held back 1,000 stories. She had lost so much, but never let the world see her break. Dignity was her chosen armor. Jackie Kennedy was a master of patience and quiet control. Her Secret Service code name was Lace, a word as delicate and strong as she was. She spoke several languages, hosted Pablo Casals at the White House, counted Leonard Bernstein as a friend, and found solace in music and the sea. She turned silence into power and made her own narrative, never defined by any one man or era. She died in May at the age of 64, surrounded by her children, her books, her friends, and the ocean breeze. Her son John Jr. announced her passing with the words, "She was surrounded by her friends and her family and her books and the people and the things that she loved." And she left as she had lived on her own terms. Why was Jackie special? Because she showed what true elegance under pressure looks like. Because she turned tragedy into legacy and refused to be contained by anyone's expectations. Because her silence could be thunder and her dignity unforgettable. So tonight, let a candle burn gently in your memory. Picture Jackie on a breezy balcony with a book in her lap, and the sea whispering beyond, not just a first lady, but a woman who always, always belonged to herself. James Brown didn't just enter a room, he exploded into it. The air shifted, the floor seemed to tremble, and suddenly everyone's heartbeat took on a new groove. He didn't walk onto the stage, he hit it with a force that felt like a jolt of pure electricity. He screamed, he stomped, he slid across the floor, and in every spotlight he seemed larger than life, sweat glistening on silk, every note a challenge and a promise. If there was ever such a thing as soul in motion, it was James Brown. He was more than a singer. He was an event, a revolution, a pulse that made you move even if you didn't mean to. He was born James Joseph Brown in the early days of May, 1933, in a weathered shack in Barnwell, South Carolina. His arrival into the world was marked by struggle. Poverty wrapped him like a second skin. When his mother left, James was sent to Augusta, Georgia, to live with his aunt, a woman who ran a brothel and kept a hard house, but always made sure there was music and laughter somewhere under the chaos. He grew up shining shoes for coins, dancing on street corners for nickels, picking cotton, scrapping to survive. But from the very start, there was something inside him, a kind of rhythm that lived in his bones and wouldn't let go. Even as a boy, James Brown could not stand still. He could outdance and outsing anyone on the block, and the streets of the South became his first stage. But trouble was never far. Petty theft landed him in a youth detention center, a place where time moved slowly and the future felt locked away. But even there, he found a friend, Bobby Byard, a fellow inmate, and a kindred musical spirit. Their friendship would become the foundation of his career. After his release, James joined Bobby's group, the Gospel Starlighters, a group that soon evolved into the famous Flames. In 1956, they recorded Please, 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 a desperate, aching cry of a song that cracked open the world and sold 1 million copies. Suddenly, everyone knew his name. The world didn't just hear James Brown, it felt him. From that moment, he was unstoppable. Single after single followed, each a new eruption. Try Me, Night Train, Papa's Got a Brand New Bag. James didn't just sing, he attacked every song, chopping lyrics into jagged bursts, turning melodies into rhythm, pushing every band member to their limits and beyond. He made funk a living thing. His band was a machine, brutal, relentless, drilled to perfection. A missed note, a half-beat late, and you might find yourself fined or fired. But when they hit the groove, it was alchemy. Horns stabbed the air, guitars slashed like razors, drums cracked, and at the center, always was James, a dynamo burning brighter than the spotlights. He danced like Fred Astaire fused with a heavyweight fighter, collapsing mid-song only to rise again, draped in a cape, reborn in the screams of the crowd. In 1965, I Got You, I Feel Good became an anthem of joy that pulsed through every radio and jukebox in America. Then came It's a Man's World, Cold Sweat, Get Up, I Feel Like Being a Sex Machine. Each hit changed the rules, each performance raised the bar. But James Brown was never just about the music. As America trembled through the civil rights era, his voice grew louder, prouder, sharper. After the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., cities were burning. In Boston, James took to the stage, broadcasting a concert that kept thousands off the streets and brought people together through music instead of violence. He released "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud," a song that became a battle cry for generations, echoing in schools, rallies, and every corner where people dared to hope. He visited schools, preached education, and demanded black economic empowerment. On stage and off, he styled himself as a leader, not just an entertainer, but a man who expected and demanded excellence. Funk was his creation, but so was a new sense of pride and power in the community. His sound laid the groundwork for hip-hop, sampled endlessly by artists like Public Enemy, Dr. Dre, Kendrick Lamar. Every snare hit and grunt a part of America's musical DNA. But genius for James Brown came with chaos. His personal life spun through marriages, divorces, financial troubles, and wild, sometimes frightening episodes. He could be fiercely loyal or dangerously unpredictable. He was feared by band members, loved by fans, and impossible to ignore. Legal troubles caught up with him, including a notorious high-speed chase in the late 80s that ended with him behind bars for more than 2 years. Still, he never stopped coming back. In the 90s, he appeared in movies, played for new generations, and proved again that the beat was his and his alone. He was a licensed pilot. He traveled with a full entourage, including a personal valet just to manage his hair. He demanded the best hotels, the crispest suits, the wildest crowds. He recorded more than 100 charting singles, performed right up until his final days. He died on Christmas Day, 2006, at the age of 73. Just days after his last show, still giving, still sweating, still moving the crowd. Why was James Brown special? Because he turned pain into rhythm, sweat into celebration. Because he made black pride a groove and taught America how to dance to a beat it never knew it needed. He was more than the godfather of soul. He was the very heart beneath it all. So tonight, let the beat ripple through your dreams. Picture James Brown spinning in a beam of stage light, cape swirling, microphone trembling, the crowd screaming, and that voice commanding, "Get on up!" We did. And we still do. Before there were silver screen goddesses, before the Hollywood signs sparkled in the hills, there was Mary Pickford. She was more than a pretty face with golden curls. She was the very blueprint for what it meant to be a star. Long before anyone had heard of Marilyn's shimmer or Audrey's whisper, Mary's laughter was echoing across movie palaces, drawing crowds who came not just for the story, but for her. She was born Gladys Louise Smith on an April morning in 1892, in a modest Toronto home where hope had to work as hard as anyone else. Her father's battle with alcohol ended when she was just 5, leaving her mother Charlotte to keep the family afloat with sewing and taking in boarders. In that world of struggle, Mary learned that softness was not weakness, and that a doll-like face could hide a steel will. By the time she was a child, Mary was already on stage, traveling with theater companies through Canada and the United States, performing for pennies in towns that blurred into each other, learning to read an audience as easily as she read a book. The stage became her school and hardship her tutor. Nights were cold, costumes were borrowed, and applause was sometimes the only warmth. She cared for her younger sister Lottie and little brother Jack as the troupe moved from place to place. Every role she played made her stronger, more determined, and by 15, Mary had charmed the great Broadway producer David Belasco into giving her a part in The Warrens of Virginia. That was the moment she became Mary Pickford, the name she would carry as she changed the world. Soon after, Mary found herself in the new world of moving pictures, joining the Biograph Company under the legendary D.W. Griffith. Films were silent, actors anonymous, and no one expected the audience to care about names. But Mary changed all that. With a face that could break your heart or lift your spirit, she brought emotion, realism, and depth to her roles. In film after film, Mary's presence shone. She became America's first movie sweetheart. But even as she played orphans, spirited girls, and underdogs, she was negotiating for creative control, choosing her scripts and handpicking her directors. By her 20s, Mary Pickford was a force of nature. She starred in hundreds of films, from Tess of the Storm Country to Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm, always finding the spark in each character. She played children into her 30s, her petite frame and youthful spirit making audiences believe every single moment. People didn't just see a movie, they went to see Mary. Her face drew crowds, her name on a marquee sold tickets by the thousands. And in the chaos of the 19-teens, she was the calm at the center of Hollywood's storm. She was the first to have her name lit up outside a theater, the first to command a percentage of the box office, the first to show that an actor could be bigger than any studio. She could draw riots, stop traffic, and make movie executives nervous. Mary didn't just want fame, she wanted ownership. In 1919, alongside Charlie Chaplin, D.W. Griffith, and her future husband Douglas Fairbanks, she founded United Artists, a company run by artists for artists. It was bold, almost reckless, and it changed the industry forever. Mary Pickford wasn't just starring in films. She was producing, marketing, and distributing them, making sure that the people who made the movies could actually control their own creations. Her marriage to Douglas Fairbanks turned them into Hollywood royalty. Together, they built Pickfair, a Beverly Hills palace where world leaders, poets, and presidents came to dine and dream. Their honeymoon in Europe drew crowds bigger than royalty, crowds who wept just to catch a glimpse of the first couple of cinema. The world watched, and Mary kept moving forward. But time never stands still, not even for stars. The Roaring Twenties brought a new challenge, sound. Her first talking picture, Coquette, forced her to cut her famous curls and speak lines for the first time. She won an Academy Award. But the innocence the world loved did not always fit the new age of movies. She made only a few talking films before she chose to step back, retiring from acting in her early 40s, just as her marriage to Fairbanks ended. Her second marriage, to Charles Buddy Rogers, was gentler and lasted the rest of her life. Even after leaving the screen, Mary Pickford did not fade. She helped run United Artists, co-founded the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, and fought for film preservation before anyone else realized how quickly memories could fade. She donated her own film library for safekeeping, determined that the history she helped make would not be lost. But in private, Mary struggled. The end of her career, the loss of her mother and siblings, led to years of seclusion. She battled depression and alcoholism, rarely leaving her beloved Pickford. Yet even in the quiet, her legacy never dimmed. In 1976, the Academy gave her an honorary Oscar, one of her last moments in the public eye. She died in May 1979 at the age of 87, a legend whose impact still pulses through every frame of film. She made over 250 movies, though many are now lost to time. She was one of the first to put her name and face on products, advertising everything from soap to dresses. She was a sharp businesswoman, a friend to Amelia Earhart and Eleanor Roosevelt, and a fighter for creative independence. Once, she declared that adding sound to movies would be like putting lipstick on the Venus de Milo, unnecessary and maybe missing the point. Why was Mary Pickford special? Because she made people fall in love with the movies, because she refused to be a silent partner in her own story, because she showed the world what a movie star could be and then became even more. So tonight, picture her in soft black and white, skipping across the silent screen, her curls bouncing, her eyes shining. Not just a starlet, not just America's sweetheart. Mary Pickford was the soul of an industry, the silent voice that made the world listen. Before the magic of computer effects, before billion-dollar franchises and stadium-sized premieres, there was a man with a cane, a bowler hat, and a mustache. And with nothing but his body and a camera, he made the world both laugh and cry. Charles Spencer Chaplin, known everywhere simply as Charlie, was more than an actor. He was a storyteller, a rebel, a poet in shoes too big for his feet, whose greatest power was saying everything while barely uttering a word. His most famous creation, the Tramp, was no ordinary comic figure. He was the hope and heartbreak of the everyday person, always struggling, often hungry, but never without dignity or defiance. Charlie was born in April 1889 in the crowded heart of London. The world he entered was gray and hard, a place where his parents, both performers, did their best to make a living in music halls. But joy was fleeting. His father drank himself away when Charlie was only a child, and his mother, Hannah, drifted in and out of hospitals, her mind unraveling with every heartbreak. Little Charlie bounced between workhouses and orphanages, learning to fight for every scrap and every smile. Hunger and loneliness were his first teachers, but in the darkness, he discovered something else. A light that danced on stage, a talent for mimicry and mischief, a gift for turning pain into laughter. He joined a children's dance troupe at the age of 8, and by his late teens, was already one of London's most promising young vaudeville comedians. In 1910, He set sail for North America with Fred Karno's troupe, performing slapstick routines that left audiences breathless. Hollywood, still in its infancy, took notice. In 1913, Keystone Studios signed him. Just a year later, Charlie created the character that would change his life, the tramp. With baggy pants, a tight coat, battered shoes, and a walk that teetered between hope and despair, the tramp was born in kid auto races at Venice. He wasn't handsome or rich. He was scrappy, awkward, soft-hearted, and indomitable. In a world of chaos, the tramp offered tenderness, a gentle hand extended to anyone who needed it. By 1916, Charlie Chaplin was the highest-paid actor in the world. Crowds mobbed him wherever he went. Shops sold Chaplin dolls and hats, and moviegoers queued around the block for a glimpse of that unforgettable silhouette on a flickering screen. But Charlie was more than a clown. He wrote, directed, produced, edited, starred in, and even composed the music for his films. He was a one-man orchestra, obsessed with control and perfection, never satisfied until every frame matched the vision in his mind. In 1919, he joined forces with Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and D.W. Griffith to form United Artists, a move that shocked Hollywood and gave artists the power to distribute their own work. From there came masterpieces. The Kid, where Chaplin's tramp became a surrogate father to a streetwise child. The Gold Rush, with its famous scene of Charlie eating his shoe, mixing humor and hunger into something unforgettable. City Lights, a ballet of love and longing, and Modern Times, where, in the midst of the industrial age, he made us laugh at machines and cry for humanity. Chaplin clung to silence even as talkies took over. Not because he feared change, but because the tramp's silence made him universal. No language was needed, a look, a gesture, a stumble spoke to everyone. When Charlie finally did speak, he made it count. In The Great Dictator, he dared to mock fascism, playing both a tyrant and a gentle barber. In the film's final monologue, he set aside comedy and spoke directly to the camera. A plea for peace, for kindness, for a world not yet lost. It remains one of the most moving speeches ever filmed. But America can be fickle with its rebels. The late 1940s and 50s brought trouble. Chaplin's politics, his refusal to become a citizen, and public scandals, messy court cases, rumors, and enemies in high places led to his effective exile. While traveling to London, he was banned from returning to the States, forced to settle in Switzerland. Yet he kept creating, even in the quiet. Limelight, a meditation on fame and fading dreams. A King in New York, a pointed satire of paranoia and power. Chaplin composed music for his films, including Smile, that haunting melody later sung by voices as different as Nat King Cole and Michael Jackson. He won an honorary Oscar in 1972. And as he returned to Hollywood, he received a standing ovation that lasted 12 minutes, the longest in Oscar history. In December 1977, Charlie Chaplin passed away in Switzerland at the age of 88. It was Christmas Day, as if the universe chose a day of joy for the man who brought so much of it to others. He was married 4 times, most famously to Una O'Neill, daughter of playwright Eugene O'Neill, and had 11 children. He never won a competitive Oscar, despite shaping the very language of cinema. His body was once stolen from its grave and held for ransom, as if even death couldn't keep the world from wanting more of Charlie Chaplin. Why was he special? Because he found poetry in poverty, hope in hunger, and laughter in tears. Because he believed that the world could be better, and proved it every time the tramp shuffled down the road, never looking back, always trusting that the show must go on. So tonight, as the music rises and the film flickers, picture the tramp with his cane, his hat, his crooked smile. He walks into the sunset, a little lonely, a little defiant, but never defeated. Thanks to him, the laughter always finds a way to return. If the cinema has a soul, perhaps it looks out through Lillian Gish's eyes. She was there when moving pictures were still magic tricks, when the clatter of a hand-cranked camera was louder than the applause, when theaters were little more than penny arcades called Nickelodeons. Lillian Gish moved with the delicacy of a breeze, but anchored herself with a kind of quiet, iron-willed resolve. She didn't just act in the movies, she taught the movies how to act. Lillian Diana Gish was born in the chill of an Ohio autumn in 1893 in the city of Springfield. Life dealt her challenges early. Her father left the family when she was small, and her mother, Mary, found a way to survive by opening a candy shop. Sweetness was something the Gish women learned to make for themselves. By the time Lillian was barely 10, she and her younger sister Dorothy were already on the stage, traveling from town to town, sleeping in strange rooms, learning to play to whatever audience turned up. For a while, they shared rooms with a bright, ambitious girl named Gladys Smith, who would soon become Mary Pickford, another future legend. Destiny, it seemed, liked to gather its giants together before they knew they would change the world. But Lillian's greatest turning point came in 1912, when Mary introduced her to a visionary director named D.W. Griffith at Biograph Studios. Griffith saw in Lillian something rare, a face that spoke volumes without words, an actor who could fill the screen with emotion using just a breath, a trembling lip, the flicker of a glance. Lillian trusted him completely, taking on roles that required both physical courage and emotional depth. She was tossed into snowbanks, battered by wind machines, and in one of her most famous scenes for Way Down East, she actually floated down a frozen river on a slab of ice, her hair wild, her fingers numbing, refusing to fake the scene for the camera. She became the first lady of American cinema, starring in hundreds of films that helped shape the art itself. In The Birth of a Nation, a film forever tainted by its racism, she was at the epicenter of cinema's evolution, showing the world that acting could be subtle, powerful, and painfully real. She followed with Intolerance, Broken Blossoms, and Orphans of the Storm, turning every close-up into a portrait, every silence into a sentence. What made Lillian Gish different was her restraint. On the stage, you shouted to the balcony. On the screen, she taught, you only had to whisper. The camera would come to you. She could draw tears just by letting her lips tremble or break hearts with a single look into the lens. She believed in purity, in holding back. in letting the story speak for itself through her stillness. When sound arrived and many silent stars faded, Lillian endured. She brought the same elegance and power to her talking roles. From One Romantic Night in the 30s to her haunting, unforgettable turn in The Night of the Hunter in 1955, where she battled darkness and danger with the same unwavering gaze. She was more than an actress. She was a champion of cinema. Lillian lectured about the importance of film as art, supported the preservation of old films, and mentored new generations of actors, urging them to honor the craft. Her discipline was legendary. She performed into her 90s, her career spanning 75 years, making her a living link between the birth of movies and their golden age. Her personal life was marked by independence. Dorothy, her sister, found fame in comedies, but Lillian's work was nearly always dramatic, almost spiritual. She never married, famously declaring she never met anyone she loved more than her work. She was deeply religious, loyal to her friends, a lover of poetry, and a believer in the moral power of art. She received an honorary Oscar in 1971 and a Kennedy Center honor in 1982. She was there from the beginning, witnessing cinema's transformation from flickering shadows to widescreen color dreams. Lillian Gish lived to be 99, passing away in 1993. Her death quiet and dignified, just as she had lived. Why was Lillian Gish special? Because she taught cinema to feel. Because her strength was never loud but always unshakable. Because she stood at the edge of the unknown, facing the camera, daring the world to blink first. She didn't just survive the birth of an industry. She shaped it with grace and patience, always finding light in the silence. So tonight, close your eyes and picture a girl with wide, wondering eyes and wind-blown hair, standing at the edge of a silent frame, looking into a world that hadn't yet learned how to dream. That's Lillian Gish, not just the First Lady of cinema, but its quiet, undying heartbeat. Before Marlon Brando, acting was often about performance, about standing in the light and delivering lines with polish. After him, it was about truth, raw, unpredictable, vulnerable, dangerous. Marlon Brando didn't just act. He transformed every role into an act of rebellion, making cinema more honest and more human. He was a storm in a man's skin, a live wire you couldn't turn away from, never the same twice, never tamed. He was born on the 3rd of April, 1924, in the heart of Omaha, Nebraska. The Brando household was a study in opposites. His father, Marlon Sr., was a salesman, often away, always stern, the sort of man who believed discipline was the answer to every problem. His mother, Dodie, was softness and chaos, a dreamer and a local theater actress, but also an alcoholic whose love and pain ran together like rain down a window. Marlon would call her the most important force in his life, her creativity, her suffering, her longing for something more. He was a restless boy, expelled from school after school, until he landed at Shattuck Military Academy in Minnesota, where he alternated between reckless rebellion and silent brooding. But it was in New York, in the 40s, that Brando's life finally found its shape. He studied at the New School with Stella Adler, who taught him not just how to act, but how to feel, how to strip away pretense until only the truth remained. Brando learned that emotions, real, messy, unfiltered, had a power that could shake an audience to its core. His Broadway debut came in 1944, but it was as Stanley Kowalski in Tennessee Williams, a streetcar named Desire, that he exploded into legend. Stanley was everything old Hollywood feared: magnetic, brutal, animal, yet wounded in ways that felt dangerously close to real life. Brando didn't just play Stanley, he prowled the stage, a caged tiger you couldn't predict. When the film arrived in 1951, his slurred speech, mussed hair, and refusal to play the matinee idol changed the rules forever. He made acting dangerous. He made it alive. For years, Brando was untouchable, the electric heart of every screen he walked onto. In Viva Zapata, he was a revolutionary, all fire and principle. In Julius Caesar, he brought a violent grace to Shakespeare. In The Wild One, he delivered the line that became a rallying cry for lost generations. "What are you rebelling against?" The answer, "What do you got?" But perhaps his greatest early triumph was on The Waterfront, where he played Terry Malley, the washed-up boxer longing for dignity. In the backseat of a cab, lamenting, "I could have been a contender," Brando broke hearts and won his first Oscar. At the height of his fame, he might have coasted, but that was never his way. He directed One-Eyed Jacks, experimented with new styles, and grew more outspoken, marching with Martin Luther King Jr., speaking out for Native American rights, and always questioning the very system that made him a star. As the 60s faded, so did Brando's standing in Hollywood. Off-screen scandals, weight gain, and erratic behavior made him infamous. Studios whispered he was impossible. Directors feared his moods, his improvisation, his demands for freedom. But in 1972, Francis Ford Coppola took a chance and cast him as Don Vito Corleone in The Godfather. Brando transformed himself, packing cotton into his cheeks, letting his voice sink to a gravelly whisper, moving with the slow dignity of a dying lion. It was more than acting. It was resurrection. He won a second Oscar, and then refused it, sending Sachin Littlefeather to decline the award on behalf of Native American rights, shocking a world unused to such public defiance. That same year, he made Last Tango in Paris, a film that blurred the line between performance and pain, and would later be remembered as much for its controversy as for its artistry. He followed with Superman, playing Jor-El for a paycheck that made headlines, and Apocalypse Now, where his improvisation and mystery turned Colonel Kurtz into a nightmare, a shadow with the weight of war itself. In his later years, Brando became a myth and a recluse. He retreated to a private island, surrounded himself with animals, indulged in practical jokes, and fathered 11 known children. He suffered devastating losses: his son Christian's conviction, his daughter Cheyenne's tragic end, and never fully recovered. He worked sporadically, sometimes brilliant, sometimes disinterested, always refusing to be anyone's puppet. He used earpieces, read cue cards, gained and lost weight. But even when he barely tried, the screen could not look away. He died on the 1st of July, 2004, at the age of 80 from respiratory failure. His final years were enigmatic, at times warm, often bitter, always unpredictable. He was once voted both the most attractive and most difficult actor alive. He adored animals, bongo drums, ice cream, and memorizing phone books for fun. Why was Marlon Brando special? Because he cracked cinema open and let the truth flood in. Because he made brokenness beautiful. Because he dared to show the soul beneath the skin. And when he did, we believed not in the performance, but in the very possibility of truth. So tonight, dim the lights, play a classic, and watch a man disappear into myth. That's Brando, not just a role, but a living presence, and like all great presences, he still lingers. Before superheroes soared and space battles dazzled, before franchises filled theaters and toy shelves, there was a little girl whose dimpled cheeks and bouncing curls brought the light back to a struggling world. Shirley Temple didn't just appear on the screen, she shone, she twirled. She tap-danced her way into the hearts of millions. And for a while, she truly was America's best hope in its darkest days. She wasn't just a child star. She was the child star, the tiny force of nature who could make grown-ups cry and children believe that anything was possible. She was born Shirley Jane Temple in late April 1928 in the sunshine of Santa Monica, California. Her father worked at the bank. Her mother managed the home. But it was clear from the start that Shirley wasn't meant for an ordinary life. Her mother, Gertrude, spotted the spark early and enrolled her in dance lessons before her 3rd birthday. By the age of 5, Shirley was already stealing scenes in a set of short films called baby burlesques. These were strange little comedies, now controversial, where toddlers played at being adults, teetering in oversized costumes and shoes, giggling through the chaos. Even then, Shirley's energy and charisma were impossible to ignore. The true breakthrough came in 1934 with Stand Up and Cheer. And then Bright Eyes, the film that gave the world Shirley's signature tune, On the Good Ship Lollipop. That single year, she appeared in 8 movies, an astonishing feat for a girl not yet 7. The nation couldn't get enough. Shirley's charm, those twinkling eyes, the way she could sing, dance, and act all at once, made her an instant sensation. In the midst of the Great Depression, while grown-ups counted pennies and the world seemed colorless, Shirley skipped across screens, bringing color and hope to everyone who watched. At the peak of the 30s, she became the highest-grossing movie star in America, outshining the likes of Clark Gable and Joan Crawford. The Academy honored her in 1935 with a special Oscar, a miniature golden statuette for her outstanding contribution to cinema. She was just 6 years old. Year after year, from 1935 to 1938, she topped the box office, starring in movies like Curly Top, Heidi, Dimples, and The Little Colonel. It was in The Little Colonel that she danced side by side with Bill Bojangles' Robinson, Hollywood's first interracial dance pairing. And together, they created moments that still feel magical nearly a century later. Shirley Temple was more than entertainment. She was a lifeline. Children wanted to be her. Parents wanted to protect her. Politicians and presidents quoted her. Eleanor Roosevelt herself once said, "As long as our country has Shirley Temple, we will be all right." She inspired dolls, dresses, even a non-alcoholic cocktail that still bears her name. But life in the spotlight was never as easy as her effortless smile. Shirley's schedule was relentless, her image carefully crafted by studios and her mother's watchful eye. She filmed movie after movie, sang for presidents, posed for endless photographs. By the time she turned 10, she had already appeared in over 30 films. Hollywood, though, can be a fickle place. As Shirley grew, roles became harder to find. Audiences weren't quite sure what to do with a Shirley Temple who was suddenly taller, older, more aware. She acted through her teens in films like Since You Went Away and The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer. But the magic that belonged to her childhood had faded. She left movies behind at 22, still beloved, but no longer the star that Hollywood relied on in its hardest years. But Shirley Temple was not content to disappear. She stepped into a new world, one just as demanding and maybe, in its way, just as important. As Shirley Temple Black, wife to Charles Alden Black, she became a diplomat, a stateswoman, and a voice of conviction. She was America's representative to the United Nations, then ambassador to Ghana, and later ambassador to Czechoslovakia during the Velvet Revolution. In moments that shaped the world, Shirley stood with dignity and grace, trusted by presidents and foreign leaders alike. She was also a pioneer in women's health, one of the first public figures to openly discuss her breast cancer diagnosis in the early 70s, breaking the silence and helping countless women face their own struggles without shame. She earned the Kennedy Center honors in 1986, met presidents and royalty, and inspired generations with her resilience, humor, and humanity. Her curls were legendary, exactly 14, every single time. She adored animals, had a sharp wit, and was never afraid to speak her mind. She died in February 2014 at the age of 85, leaving behind a legacy not just of movies, but of hope, leadership, and courage. Why was Shirley Temple special? Because she gave hope when hope was almost gone. Because she transformed from a symbol of innocence to a champion of diplomacy and truth. Because she proved that in the smallest person could live the greatest courage, and that a dimpled smile could truly change the world. So tonight, picture her on a polished stage, tap shoes sparkling, curls bouncing, singing out with a voice as bright as springtime, bringing a weary nation to its feet. That was Shirley Temple, not just a child star, but a national treasure, and a life beautifully, bravely danced.